Welcome back to HJ Doctor Who. I'm pretty sure that's the way I've introduced like the last 5 of these videos by this point, but fuck it, I'm out of ideas, so why not? Now, we all know what the biggest villain in Doctor Who is, right? It's the Master. No, it's the Daleks. No, it's the Cybermen. Depends on who you ask, really, I guess, doesn't it? But yeah, as you can probably tell by the title, today we're focusing on the Cybermen. And yeah, specifically, I'm going to be ranking all of these Cyberman stories from what I think is the worst to the best, or my least favourite to most favourite. Rules for this is going to be every main TV story, so from classical New Who, not counting big finished books or anything, just the TV show. Every TV story where the Cybermen were either the main focus, the main villain, or had at least a big substantial role to play in terms of being an antagonistic force. And the only exception I'm making to this is I won't be counting the Wheel in Space, the Patrick Troughton story, because obviously most of it's missing and they haven't animated it yet or anything, and funnily enough it's the only Cyberman story from the main TV show that I haven't seen in its entirety in some form, so sorry to any Wheel in Space fans, but that story is not going to be counted on here, unfortunately. But apart from that one, they're all on here. First up, number 17, what I think is probably the weakest of all the Cyberman stories, is probably Closing Time from Series 6. I think somebody on YouTube once said that Closing Time was essentially like the filler episode of filler episodes. It's that bland and dull and just pointless. And there's really nothing noteworthy to this episode other than the return of the Cybermats, which was cool because they hadn't been seen since Revenge of the Cybermen in 1975. Apart from that, there's really nothing noteworthy in this whatsoever. Doctor Who's always had this weird history, especially in the modern series, of having episodes that come right before a finale just be like pointless fluff and filler, and this one's probably one of the biggest examples of that, honestly. It sees the return of Craig, played by James Corden, who everyone has, over the last few years, suddenly started despising for some reason. I don't know. I'm not familiar with James Corden whatsoever. The only things I've ever seen him in is 2 Doctor Who episodes, so yeah, I don't have much of an opinion on him as a person or anything to do with his career, so yeah. And to be perfectly honest, I mean, outside of a few funny bits here and there, I could honestly take or leave Craig Owens as a character. He's just forgettable for me. I don't really care for him whatsoever. So yeah, I'm not really interested in him or his baby or anything like that, or any of the stuff that happens regarding character between him and the Doctor. It's a Cyberman story where the main focus isn't on Cybermen, it's on the Doctor creating his baby into the power of love, which is like the most vomit-inducing trope in any kind of fucking fluff TV show I've ever had the displeasure of knowing exists. Like, please, this is Doctor Who. I'm here to see Cybermen shoot people and fucking cool sci-fi shit. I'm not here to fucking learn about the power of friendship like this is some bloody god-awful fucking Disney Channel CBeebies nonsense. And the Cyberman stuff in this is barely even there at all. What is it? It's just a crushed spaceship underneath a fucking department store. There's like 6 Cybermen down there and like a couple of Cybermats or some shit just going around eating electricity, trying to boot the place up. They barely even do anything beyond trying to convert Craig, who I didn't really care much for to begin with. I mean, the Cybermen have like a total of 5 minutes of screen time in this. I'm pretty sure the Cyberman has more screen time than the fucking Cybermen themselves. Yeah, this episode is literally the definition of pointless filler episodes before the finale. Yeah, but yeah, moving on. Number 16, the second worst Cyberman story is another Matt Smith one, Nightmare in Silver. This one ended up on the list because, like I said, I put them on preference revealer, so we got pitted against lots of others and I had to choose between it and different episodes, and I don't know, this one just ended up here because I guess I didn't pick it all that much. I haven't even really bothered rewatching it in the years since. I've probably seen it like twice all the way through. Once on broadcast, once again when I got the Series 7 DVD box set. And I don't remember a thing about it. I remember there was something to do with a space theme park. Warwick Davis is in it. The Doctor gets possessed by the Cyber Planner and has to play chess while he keeps switching between personalities. I don't remember anything about this story, and it's got one of the worst Cyberman designs as well. Or it introduces the worst Cyberman design, I think. The Iron Man ones, that's just like, what the fuck were they thinking? Yeah, not much to say on this one. Alright, number 15, we've got The Next Doctor, the Christmas special from, I think, was this 2008 Christmas special? I think it was, yeah. Yeah, another pretty forgettable outing for the Cybermen. Not to mention this episode is like pure clickbait. It's not a very good Cyberman story either. I mean, having Cybermen in a different setting other than the future or present day Earth is nice. Having them in Victorian London is a nice idea. And the Cyber Shades are kind of creepy, if kind of goofy looking. But yeah, I mean, what are the Cybermen doing in this? Alright, it's the aftermath of, I think, the Series 2 finale, where they get chucked into the void. They somehow make it out and end up stranded in Victorian London. They decide, let's recruit this random bitch in a red dress. Agreed. Let's also kidnap children to build a giant Iron Man cyber robot thing. Yes, wait, what? We can stomp around London with it and shoot people. Why would we want to do that? I don't know. It would look cool. It's a Christmas special. Don't think about the plot too much, okay? That probably sums it up quite well, actually. But yeah, The Next Doctor is generally just quite a bland and forgettable Cyberman story, as with the last couple entries on this list, really. Alright, next up, number 14, we're going into the classic series now with the last Cyberman story of that era, Silver Nemesis. A lot of people really shit on this episode. I kind of don't get a lot of the criticisms of it, to be honest. I do kind of like it, but I do think it is one of the two worst Sylvester McCoy stories, and I think it's the only weak link of season 25 as well. I think the only 7th Doctor story that I dislike more than Silver Nemesis would probably be Delta and the Bannerman. I know that might seem quite contradictory, that I just said I quite enjoy Silver Nemesis and I don't get the criticisms of it, but then I also said it's kind of my second least favourite McCoy story. But you know, we are kind of a channel of complete contradictory, so what did you expect? But yeah, in all seriousness though, Silver Nemesis, I think it's got a really good story in there, to be honest. The stuff with Lady Painful, knowing the Doctor's name and them having this like big backstory and everything, and she's trying to do like evil stuff. The neo-Nazi guy is kind of forgettable. But yeah, I think underneath it all, there is a really good plot here, and it's definitely leaning quite into the Cartmel master plan, especially sort of towards the end. But I think because this is a Cyberman story list, I'm going to put it as low down as it is, because in terms of being a Cyberman story, there's no reason for the Cybermen to even be in it. This should have just been, I mean, I don't know whether it would have been quite as interesting, but it probably could have just been a Lady Painful story, really. She's really the only villain we need in this episode. The Cybermen are just there because, well, this was supposed to be the official 25th, or silver anniversary, you see, of Doctor Who. So I guess they decided silver Cybermen, Silver Nemesis, silver anniversary, let's do it. Just a shame that Silver Nemesis ended up being pretty unpopular and everyone just dismissed it and ended up naming Remembrance of the Daleks the 25th anniversary, even though it wasn't officially that. But yeah, there's no reason for the Cybermen to be here. They're just it strays so far away from what the Cybermen were originally supposed to be. Now they're literally just humanoid robots that go around shooting people that want to harness the power of the Nemesis statue, and that's about it. Now you could argue that that's also the case for another story higher up on this list, but we'll get to that in about half an hour's time when I finish rambling. Okay, number 13, we've got the Series 8 finale, Dark Water / Death in Heaven. Now there's not really any particular reason that this is quite as low down on the list as it is. Again, it's purely just because I haven't seen it in quite a few years and I don't remember much about it. There's just better stories featuring the Cybermen that I decided upon, you know? From what I remember, I do quite like a fair few of the aspects of this episode. Missy is always a joy, and yeah, Peter Capaldi is always a joy to have. It's got Kate, who's a brilliant character. I know it's kind of a Marmite situation with people being either way feeling on this, but I quite like the bit at the end with the cyber brig as well. I thought it was quite a nice touch. Although, yeah, when you stop and think about it, there are a few issues with it, but I won't get into them here. The whole consciousness matrix storing thing that the Master or Missy is using as well to turn everyone into Cybermen, eventually bring them back from the dead. That's a pretty cool idea. I'd probably have to give it another rewatch sometime, but yeah, it just kind of ended up being here because while I think it's a good story, there's just better Cybermen episodes rank above it, so that's kind of how it ended up here, really. Number 12, back to the classic era now with Revenge of the Cybermen. The only Cyberman episode in the entirety of the 1970s, and it's kind of a botched, bland mess, really. It's decent enough, I guess, but yeah, it's really just kind of unremarkable for the most part. The highlights in this probably are the regular cast of the Doctor, Sarah and Harry. The Cybermen are a bit bland and meh in this. Their voices aren't really very good either. The whole plot of it is kind of interesting but also kind of shallow. There's this planet made of gold, and since gold is now deadly to the Cybermen, they want to blow this planet up along with the inhabitants on it. And yeah, the Vogons are really one of the least interesting alien species the classic era ever dished out, to be honest. I think the highlight of Revenge of the Cybermen is probably the bit where the Doctor is just like, Harry Sullivan is an imbecile! Next up we've got, at number 11, The 10th Planet, the original Cyberman story. This one is really noteworthy for being the first Cyberman story, the final William Hartnell story, and the introduction to the concept of regeneration, so there's a lot going on in it. And it gets very highly praised a lot of the time. And I do agree that it's a very good story, but compared to some others, and on its own merits as well, I feel it's lacking a little, to be completely honest with you. I think it's really enjoyable, but it does drag a lot in the second half especially, and I think it is a little dull, which for a 4-parter is saying something. While The 10th Planet is by no means the worst offender when it comes to slow pacing. In fact, I think it's really not that slow paced at all. It's just a little bit too meandering, like towards the middle end part for me personally. I think it's because part 4 is missing and it's animated. I think that's what it is. Now, I'm all for the animated reconstructions. For all their faults, they are probably the only way we're going to get to experience the missing stories for the rest of the time, pretty much. But I think after 3 episodes of the original footage and then the final part being animated, and because it was one of the earlier animations, it's not quite up to scratch with what we're used to nowadays either. I think maybe that's what hurts the experience a little bit for me personally, but yeah, I love it for the introduction of the Cybermen. I like the first Doctor, and it's cool to have his regeneration story available to watch, even if the actual regeneration episode, part 4, is missing and animated. Sadly, it's not going to be an episode that I clamber to rewatch quite as much as some others, really. Number 10, we have the Series 12 finale, the 3-parter technically, Haunting of Villa Diodati, Ascension of the Cybermen, and The Timeless Children. I'm counting all 3 of those together into like one big story because that's kind of what it is, really, you know. This ended up at number 10. I think it starts out really strongly with Haunting of Villa Diodati and Ascension of the Cybermen, but then The Timeless Children kind of dips down a bit. Not because I disagree with the whole Timeless Child story arc in general, I actually quite like it, I think it's a nice breath of fresh air. Where I think it dips down in the last part is it sort of devolves from a Cyberman story into a master revealing the Timeless Child revelation to the Doctor story, you know? Like a lot of Cyberman stories, especially from the last like 10 years or so of this show, they just get shoved to the side halfway through in favour of something else, and it's really annoying to see that because the Cybermen have got a lot of potential but they just never seem to be used. Those first 2 parts are great, and then we get to part 3 where they actually get onto Gallifrey. Granted, it's in ruins, but still, Cybermen on Gallifrey can't be good news, can it? And they just, you know, get shoved to the side for the most of it in favour of exploring the Timeless Child arc. After 2 episodes of building them up, the Cybermen are just forgotten about until like they come up with the regenerating Cyberman idea at the end, which has gone absolutely nowhere. From the lone Cyberman being killed off to there basically being no point in having Cybermen in this last part, it's a 3-part story that started out really strongly but then just dipped off in terms of being a Cyberman episode, really. Right, number 9, sticking to the modern series, we've got the Series 2 finale now, Army of Ghosts / Doomsday. Now, I, along with a lot of other people, have gone on record saying that this story is overrated in the past. If you want my overall opinion on Army of Ghosts and Doomsday, I think it's a brilliant story in its own right overall, but it's just the sort of meandering bit at the end with the Doctor losing Rose and saying goodbye to her on the beach and everything. That's like borderline soap opera bullshit that I'm not really a fan of, that kind of drags it down, personally. But overall, I do think it's a pretty good story. It's a nice large-scale story to have as a finale as well. It's kind of hard to class it as just a Cyberman story because obviously it's the Cybermen and the Daleks together, so yeah, it's at number 9. It's a pretty decent story, but it's not one that I'll jump up at the chance of rewatching again as often as some others higher up on the list, should we say. But yeah, it is what it is. It's far from terrible, but it's also not perfect. Number 8, we're going to have the 5 Doctors, the 20th anniversary, and yes, I am counting this as a Cyberman story because there are Cybermen in it, and they do pose a relatively large threat for most of the story. Granted, the Master and President Barusa are probably much more important villains in this story than the Cybermen, but I still think they have a substantial enough role in this story to class it as a Cyberman story, and I think it's pretty good. The story itself is really good, and Cyberman stuff is probably not quite as good in the end. But yeah, it's still a really enjoyable story, I think, as both Cyberman content and in its own right. Number 7, we've got the MOONBASE, the second ever appearance of the Cybermen. This is Patrick Troughton's first encounter with the Cybermen, and I think it's really good. Despite half of it being animated on the DVD, in all fairness, the animation is actually really good on this one. And I think the whole story is just really enjoyable. It's a brilliant little Base Under Siege story. It's just one of the best written and just best made classic Who stories. This is, you know, especially from the 60s, it's really good. Pacing's great. The Cybermen actually have a good plan of what they want to do in this, you know. Fuck around with a weather control station on the moon to ruin the Earth and then rebuild it how they want to. And add to that, the Season 4 TARDIS crew of the Second Doctor, Jamie, Ben and Polly, I just think are really underrated as well. I really love that TARDIS crew, and I wish they had more time together. And overall, it's a really enjoyable story. Not much more to say, really. Alright, number 6, we're going back to Series 2 of the modern era with Rise of the Cybermen / The Age of Steel. The Cybermen's reintroduction into the modern era, and I think it's really good. It takes a lot of inspiration from the Big Finish story Spare Parts, which is not a bad story to base your episode on. And I know this was officially the case because there's, like, in the credits there's like a thanks to Mark Platt thing or whatever, and that was because he wrote Spare Parts, so, you know. So yeah, it's basically like Spare Parts, the TV story, but on Earth. The different Doctor. While it's not quite as horrifying as Spare Parts, it's a really good, more family-friendly oriented take on how the Cybermen can get started somewhere, you know? It's just really good, you know? While I'm not the biggest fan of the new Who stompy Cybermen, they work pretty well for what they are. There's still some good body horror type stuff in there. There's still some pretty horrifying moments as well in this two-parter in particular. It's not the absolute best depiction of the Cybermen, but it's far from the worst, and I do think it is in the upper range of good Cybermen portrayals. I definitely appreciate a lot more in this story as I've gotten older, as well as I sort of noticed more things than what I did when I was a kid. Just generally a brilliant story. And at number 5 now, we're going to have Attack of the Cybermen. This one is a really polarising one for some reason. Some people really like it, and then there's people that just absolutely shit on it. It's another one of those stories. Personally, I do quite like it, although I am kind of surprised that it ended up in my top 5, to be honest. I thought it would be somewhere around like 8 or 9, but no, it ended up in my top 5. I guess there's just quite a lot to like in this one, you know. The 6th Doctor I quite like. I like that they fixed the chameleon circuit. I like that the Cybermen are doing some cool shit in this one. Lytton is back from Resurrection of the Daleks, who's a fairly interesting character, I'd say. And yeah, there's just some really good location filming in this. There's a lot of tense moments. There's a couple of dull scenes, but the better scenes more than make up for it. Although it is rather gratuitously violent for 1980s Doctor Who standards, at least. But yeah, I do find this one really enjoyable, to be honest. The Cryons are a visually interesting looking villain. Not the most interesting in terms of characterisation or backstory, but visually they are relatively cool to look at. The Sonic Lance is an interesting device that never got brought back. And there's a really nice character moment in it as well, where the Doctor realises he's completely misjudged Lytton, which kind of ends up leading to that character's death, and that obviously sets off something in the Doctor's head, and he sort of realises, I should probably be a bit better at myself, you know? Something like that, anyway. So there is that. Some problems with it, yes, it probably was a little over the top violent in places, although, to be fair, personally I don't really mind. Mind you, I can kind of see where people are coming from when they say the hand-crushing scene might have been a bit much. Some people have said it should have gone further, but I don't know. The cyber leader in this is fat as fuck, obviously. It's kind of hard to not notice that. But apart from that, there's not a lot of bad things in this story, really. I just really like it. Okay, gonna move on to number 4 now, with World Enough and Time / The Doctor Falls, the Series 10 finale. This one's generally thought of as just bloody brilliant overall, to be honest. World Enough and Time, the first part, is probably one of the best horror approaches that we've taken to exploring the Cybermen since Spare Parts, probably, to be honest. Like, this is what we want from Cybermen, like the grueling, horrific medical procedures that lead people to becoming these cyborg, mechanised fucking monsters. Personally, at least, that's what I like the best about Cybermen, and I wish they'd explore that a bit more rather than just stompy robots want to shoot some people and occasionally turn a few of them into their own kind. This two-part bloody brilliant portrayal of how the process of becoming a Cyberman works as well. While part 2 of the Doctor Falls kind of strays a bit away from that and just turns into a big sort of the Doctor and some survivors versus hordes of Cybermen type scenario, I think it is still done really well. I have heard a lot of shit being flung at the Doctor Falls in particular, but I think for what it is, it's not as bad as people say it is. And the ending as well, where the Dr. Bill and Nardole all end up going their separate ways, is just, yeah, all of that is just done brilliantly as well. 4th best Cyberman story, easily. Now, top 3. So, number 3 is Tomb of the Cybermen. Just a brilliant little self-contained Cyberman story, this. Expedition team meets up with the Doctor and companions. They find the ice tombs on the Cybermen's, I guess, backup home planet, Telos. And of course they accidentally reawaken them and have to seal them back in before they get out and fuck the universe up, because that's what Cybermen do best, I guess. Some people have called this one overrated, and I think that's probably due to the fact that it was missing for like 2.5 decades, and it built up this reputation of being like this brilliant story. And then when people found it, they found it wasn't quite as earth-shatteringly great as they were expecting, but it is still a solid story. Easily 8 out of 10 for me, I think. Like, there's not like a single issue that I have with this story, I don't think. There's a lot to like here. A little conversation between the Doctor and Victoria as well that gives us a tiny insight into the Doctor's past. And the human villains are quite compelling, and they have part of this like really interesting faction that I kind of want to learn more about, you know. And yeah, the overall Cyberman design is brilliant in this as well. The especially the part 2 cliffhanger where he just comes out and the bloke is like, "I am here to make an alliance with you," and the Cyberman's just like, "Bitch, no." It's just really chilling where they just come out silently, just disregard this guy's proposal of allying, just completely fucking knocks him down, and then just go like, "You belong to us. You shall be like us." That's possibly the worst Cyberman impression I've ever done in my life. That whole cliffhanger is really chilling, and the whole story overall has got this really like big epic quality to it. I don't know what it is. It's like from the location work, which I assume is in a quarry in the beginning scenes, to like the music and everything, just the way it's shot and everything, like some of the cinematography. It feels like one of those like big budget 60s films. There's just something about it that just seems to elevate it a bit higher than a lot of other 60s Doctor Who at the time, you know? Yeah, while it might not be the grandest story of all time, as its reputation once suggested it was, I do still think it is worthy of being as high up on the list, and it's just a really great story, one I go back to fairly often actually, to be honest, to give a rewatch. But yeah, number 2 is also a Patrick Troughton Cyberman story, and it's The Invasion. This is just a phenomenal story, completely brilliant. While it doesn't really have much of a focus on the Cybermen, even when they show up in the second half of the story, which they don't show up until the end of part 4. Considering this is an 8-part story, that's the equivalent of the main villain being revealed in like part 2, so you know. This is just one massive, grand, epic story overall. It's the first unit story as well, which is brilliant. It might be daunting, really, with being 8 parts long, but it doesn't feel that long. It feels like a 4-parter, or maybe a 6-parter at a stretch. It does feel long, but it doesn't feel long, you know? It does feel like you have sat through 3.5 hours of TV, but it doesn't feel like you've sat through 3.5 hours of dull TV. It feels like you sat through 3.5 hours of well-justified, goodly paced, that's the word now, goodly paced TV, you know? It's definitely one of the most rewarding serials to watch in all of classic Who. It's got one of the best human villains with Tobias Vaughan, and the Cybermen, they probably don't do quite as much as I would like. They only really come into full force in the last couple of episodes, to be honest. Would have liked a little bit more Cyberman action, I think, but apart from that one nitpick, there's really nothing I have to say that's bad about this story. But with all that said, at number 1, this might be a bit of a predictable pick, but I'm putting Earthshock. Now, funnily enough, like I was saying back in Silver Nemesis' spot on this list, that didn't have to be a Cyberman story. They were pointless in that story. They didn't have to be there. You could argue that the same is true for Earthshock. The plot of it is really good. It's like brilliant. But it could have worked with really any villain. The Cybermen want to... At first they want to blow planet Earth up to prevent a meeting happening between galactic alliances that were going to go to war against the Cybermen, which are already quite destitute at this point. But then halfway through, the Doctor stops the bomb and their plans change to essentially turning a space freighter into a bomb and just launching it at the Earth, which of course leads to the death of Adric. May you rest in peace. But yeah, a plot like that really could have worked with any villain in Doctor Who's massive roster of villains, so it doesn't really have to be a Cyberman story. But the fact that they are here and it is such a good story, I think justifies them being here. That, and it's just a really tense and well-paced and well-written story overall. Props to Eric Saward. This is probably among his best scripts. One of his best, definitely. This is definitely one of the best paced of the whole classic series, for sure. There's probably not a lot I can say about this one that hasn't already been said, as is the case with a lot of the best stories from this franchise, to be honest. So I'll probably just leave it at that, really, and say that Earthshock is my #1 favourite Cyberman story. As of right now, anyway. I mean, I do all these ranking videos, and to be honest, like 10 minutes after I've finished editing the video, my thoughts have probably changed, so they're kind of pointless when you think about it, but they're fun to do in the moment, you know? But yeah, that was me ranking all 17 televised Cyberman stories, with the exception of The Weed in Space, because I haven't seen it, obviously. Well, if anyone did decide to watch through to the end of this video, which I'm sure is going to be like half an hour long at least, leave a like if you enjoyed and subscribe if you haven't already, and feel free to comment any of your thoughts on either my list or your own ranking of Cyberman stories in general. I'll hopefully be back within a week or two perhaps for another video on this channel. I am off to refresh my water supply as my throat is dry as frick right now. If there's nothing else to say, then goodbye.